A very warm welcome to you. Good morning, good afternoon from where you're dialing in from. My name's Ian Walker. I'm from the UK. I work for Public Health England as a public health specialist, and it's my privilege to be chairing the call today in this webinar. And we've got a great lineup for you today of speakers who are based in the overseas territories and will be sharing their fantastic work that they've been doing on the subject of children and young people's mental health. Just a bit of housekeeping from me at the start, if that's okay. We'd like to suggest that those who are not speaking on the program, if you could please turn your videos off and mute your microphones, that'd be really helpful just to preserve the bandwidth for everyone. We do have a chat function that I'm hoping most of you will be able to access. So please do use that chat function to put comments or to pose questions. Hopefully you've had sight of the program, and you'll see that we are going to have some short presentations, and that will be followed by some Q&A for you to pose questions and have interaction with our speakers today. And we're going to round off with some reflections from some political leaders and then colleagues from the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office in the UK. We're going to slightly change the order of the programme today. So we're going to actually start with Kimberly. So if I can introduce Kimberly, who's the chair of UKOTA. Kimberly's the UK representative for the government of Bermuda and head of the government's office in the UK. Kimberly was appointed to the position of UK representative in 2008 and is responsible for the government of Bermuda's policy direction and diplomacy in the UK and Europe, mandated by the government. And through her chairmanship of UKOTA, Kimberly currently holds responsibility for coordinating the overall engagement between all of the OT governments and the UK government on collective policy areas for the OTs. Kimberly has a Bachelor of Law from the University of Buckingham and a Master's in International and Commercial Law from, and that's specialising in public international law. Kimberly has achieved a postgrad diploma in legal practice from the Oxford Institute of Legal Practice, and she's lived and worked in the UK for 16 years with her partner and 2 sons. So it's my pleasure to invite Kimberly to take the floor and please introduce this webinar to colleagues. Over to you, Kimberly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Good day, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And as said, my name is Kimberly Durant, and I'm the UK representative for the government of Bermuda and the current chair of the United Kingdom Overseas Territories Association. Thank you for joining our second UKOTA Mental Health Webinar. Our first webinar was hosted in December last year, and as a result of its success, it was agreed in UKOTA to host a follow-up event. Based on our survey from the December event, we have agreed to focus today's session on children and young people's mental health, as this is one of the more prominent areas of interest from those in the territories. Considering feedback received via the survey, Public Health England launched the following initiatives: the appointment of Mental Health First Aid Wales to undertake online instructor training. Each overseas territory had the opportunity to nominate 2 persons to receive this training. Most territories took this up, and the instructors are now able to provide mental health first aid to personnel within their own respective territory. Further, territories were invited to submit applications for the opportunity to partner with Mind UK, a leading mental health NGO, to address the stigma of mental health. The opportunity was open to both government and mental health NGOs in the territories. The 2 territories have now been selected. Today, we are delighted to have a variety of professionals from the territories, which include the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, Gibraltar, and FCDO, but we are also looking forward to hearing from participants from all territories during the Q&A session. I wish to give a special thank you to the UKOTA Mental Health Working Group, led by St. Helena representative Mrs. Kettle Warboys and Mr. Ian Walker of Public Health England, the facilitator today, for their hard work, as the webinar provides an opportunity for coordinating and sharing experiences amongst the overseas territories. Thank you. and please welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Kimberly, for that warm welcome. We appreciate the support of UKOTA in being able to put on this webinar this afternoon, this morning. Great. So without further ado, then I'd love to get into our program and welcome our speakers. I suggest we go to Dr. Yates from Bermuda. So if I just introduce Dr. Yates to you, apologies, colleagues, for this. So Dr. Peter Yates has completed his medical training at the University of Cape Town before training as a child and adolescent psychiatrist at Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children in London. As a research fellow at Imperial College London, Dr. Yates published research on measuring complexity and outcomes in child and adolescent psychiatry, the evaluation of self-esteem and depression in adolescents and young offenders, and the law. In addition to the assessment and treatment of developmental disorders and mental illness in children and adolescents, Dr. Yates has special interest in eating disorders, learning difficulties, childcare, medico-legal work, fostering and adoption. Dr. Yates, it's our pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. Can I just check your sound is okay? If you'd like to speak, and just check that, please.
Thank you, Ian. Hope you can hear me.
We can, yeah. Please go ahead, Peter. Thanks very much.
Right. I'm not going to introduce myself any further than what Ian has said, other than to say that I work as a consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist in Bermuda for Bermuda Hospitals Board. This presentation has been put together by myself and does not necessarily reflect the views or the opinions of the Bermuda Hospital Board. Can we have the next slide? Michael, I don't know if you need to control it or I can.
I'll be controlling the presentation, so just let me know when you want to go forwards.
So could we have the next slide, please? I've been asked to do three things in this talk. First of all, to describe the multidisciplinary mental health service for children and young people that is in operation in Bermuda. Secondly, to mention and highlight the challenges that young people face in terms of their mental health. And thirdly, to attempt to address how these challenges could be better addressed by services in the future. Could I have the next slide, please? So let's begin by just talking a little bit about Bermuda. Bermuda has a total population of around 64,000. So that is just over double the population of Gibraltar, over 5 times the population of the Falklands, and certainly doesn't necessarily represent the average characteristics and population of the islands, given the wide range of islands and populations. In Bermuda, 20% of the population is school-aged children and young people. And I thought it important to mention the educational provision in Bermuda, because I've never come across this, certainly in the UK or anywhere else where I've worked, where half of the children are educated in the government system and half are educated in the private system. Could I have the next slide, please? So this slide tries to set out the arrangement of services. Let me begin by saying on the left-hand side, you can see the categories of free to use and fee to use. And those apply then to the colored areas to the right of that. And on the very bottom, you've got a scale of age from birth through to 5 years, 18 years, and then carrying on to the right into adulthood. So if we start at the top, it is possible to be born and to die in Bermuda and to have your medical needs met by the government. I mean, that is possible. In other words, without any fee being paid. It's not very common, but it certainly is possible. The next category in my slide is that of the voluntary sector, which, as you can see, serves people from birth right through until death. And then we come into the middle band, which is the yellow band with the one service highlighted in the white block. So this band is really the mental health band. And as you can see by looking to the left, it still falls into the free to use category. So we have a child development program that picks up children at birth, and that is fairly easy to do because there's only one place where children are born in Bermuda, and that's in the hospital, or one place where they should be born. There may be ones that are born on the way to the hospital, but there are no home births. So those children are picked up and they are followed by the child development program up to the age of 4 or 5. They are all screened developmentally at the age of 2. And early autistic spectrum disorder screening is done for the young ones in that program. I think it's important to remember, if you look at the whole population, or any population, the peaks of the diagnosis of autism are around the age of 4, and then around the age of 8, and possibly a peak, which interestingly is probably becoming more of a peak during adolescence. So the child development program will should pick up all the young children with the more severe autism. And then staying in the yellow band, I'm going to go across to the right-hand side where we have adult mental health that comes in at about age 18 or 19 and will see people through until they no longer need the service or they die. And that leaves the bit in the middle. So the service that I work for is the Child and Adolescent Service, where we will see referrals from parents, school counselors, social workers, police officers, other referrers. We even take self-referrals in the older adolescent group. And as long as they have some symptoms of mental ill health, let's put it that way, they would at least or go through an intake process and be screened and possibly stay in the service for treatment or be referred back into the voluntary sector or to some other service. The other last bit in the yellow section is psychoed. That is provision for children who have complex needs, whose needs cannot be met on the island, to be sent abroad. Now, that program has people that support it and certainly people that do not support it. There have been initiatives to provide these services on island over many decades, which has been difficult. These children would need to be on a care order to go overseas. And I don't want to be too distracted. I can go on and on about the different nuances of this. But so at the moment, there probably are about 4 children overseas in the US in treatment. And they'll come back when their treatment is finished or when they turn 18, as their care order will expire and they cannot be unaccompanied adults in the US. So obviously the legal situation will change there. Now moving down in my figure, you can see we come to the category of fee to use. So these are services that are paid for. So there certainly are local pediatricians, and there are many pediatricians in the US and Canada and the UK. So people can use their medical insurance to have pediatric or medical input, and certainly they can use their medical insurance or their dollars to have psychiatry locally or abroad. Now, there's only one child and adolescent psychiatric post, and that's in the service that I work in. There are 2 psychiatrists, adult psychiatrists in private practice who see, I'm not quite sure exactly, I just don't know, but I know they see some teenagers. I'm not sure what their cutoff age is. And then certainly there are big hospitals and assessment centers readily available, within 2 hours, 3 hours flight from Bermuda in the US. Could I have the next slide, please?
Peter, you have a couple more minutes. Okay.
Oh, right. So I'm running out of time. Okay, so the service I work for is a multidisciplinary team. In the last year, we've had 100 referrals. Normally, we have 150, almost 3,000 outpatient contacts. We have a 4-bedded inpatient unit that's collapsible. Today, it's full. 6 months ago, it may have been empty. We have 15 inpatient admissions over the last year and about 50 consultations over the last year, mainly to school, but also including court consultations and court reports. Could I have the next slide, please? So this is what I, as the consultant, have seen, and this is looking at my figures. About a third of the diagnoses, this sample was 100 cases taken over a 2-month period a few years ago. A third are ADHD, a third of anxiety and depression, and the other third are autism, conduct disorder, a few other bits and pieces, and interestingly 7% had no diagnosis. At least half of them have a second or third diagnosis as well as the main diagnosis, and virtually all of them presented with at least 6 months of moderate and severe symptoms. Could I have the next slide, please? I also looked at environmental factors just so people have an idea of not only the diagnosis but the other difficulties that our patients face. Just over a quarter had some sort of learning difficulty, which was either specific or mild, generalized. With regards to education, a quarter were having extra input at school. As you can see, a few had been excluded from school and one was in a special school. We always are very, very interested who the children live with, and almost 90% lived with one or both parents. There were a few that were placed with other family members, 5% in foster care and 1% in an institution, in other words, a children's home. There's a real shortage of foster carers and potential adopters in Bermuda, but that in itself is a discussion. We also looked at agencies involved. 1 in 5 are involved with social services, 1 in 8 with education, and 1 in 10 with pediatrics when they are referred to us. Next slide, please.
Just 1 more minute, Peter, okay? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to have to go really fast. This slide is a study, one of my interests, of complexity using scales, and basically it shows that the complexity of cases seen in the Bermuda clinic is no different or very little difference to the complexity of cases seen in several London services. As you can see at the bottom of the slide, the highest complexity was in a service that had learning difficulties associated with the child and adolescent mental health. Next slide, please. These are the things that I think are the challenges at the moment. There are effects from COVID, massive increase in anxiety disorders, massive increase in other disorders that are not traditionally known to have their origins in anxiety, but clinicians are saying that seems to be the case. The amount of substances that are available on the market and how enticing their use has been made out to be, often by social media and peer groups, is a major concern. Personally, I think that social media will have a massive impact on human development, particularly on adolescents. I'm also concerned that parents and society has perceptions that children are tougher than they really are and are able to manage more than they really can do. Another concern for me is access to quality care. And if I can just go on to the final slide, and I'm sorry about the rush, I think the way forward for us is that we need to manage information. I think what's happened in the pandemic has shown how information can be managed appropriately and inappropriately, and how harmful information can be to certain groups of people. Managing information also relates to using technology to really get to electronic record keeping, so we can, stream down our record keeping. I think services need to be flexible and accessible. I never thought I would be doing video conferencing or video interviews prior to the pandemic. I thought maybe I'd get to it in 5 or 10 years' time. I now use it quite routinely, and now moving back to face-to-face, I've actually incorporated in a combination of face-to-face and video access, and patients and families like that. Finally, I just want to say, I think we need to have another look at schools. I think they offer great opportunities to access children, to do screening, to do treatment, to do social skills building. And I think we've moved away from them, and I think we need to go back there. Sorry about the rush. I'm going to stop there.
That's great. Thank you, Peter. We really appreciate your contributions today, and a really fascinating description there of the services that you're involved in. We're going to move on to our next presentation and going to try again with Dr. Rubin. But just back to Peter, if you wouldn't mind, there's a couple of questions in the chat. I just wondered if you'd be able to maybe respond to those using the chat function, and we'll cover those as well, just so people can also see the answers who maybe can't see the chat when we come to the Q&A. But if you'd be able to maybe just respond to those while the next presentation is going on, that'd be really helpful. Without further ado, let me introduce Virginia to you. So Dr. Virginia Rubin is the clinical psychologist from the British Virgin Islands. She's a native Virgin Islander and has spent her life in pursuit of higher education. After completing her high school education, Dr. Rubin attended Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, where she achieved a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology. Dr. Rubin immediately began her graduate studies at Nova Southeastern University, Fort Lauderdale, where she was accepted into the doctoral program in clinical psychology. In 2003, she received her doctorate in clinical psychology and promptly returned to the Virgin Islands in order to begin her service to her community. Dr. Rubin is currently employed with the BVI Health Services Authority as the Director of Community Mental Health Services, which provides her with the unique opportunity of working closely with the community, with local and international agencies, and the development of mental health policies and legislation. Dr. Rubin's interests include a voracious appetite for reading, travelling to exotic locales, and mentoring the future leaders of the Virgin Islands. Virginia, it's our pleasure to welcome you to the webinar, and over to you to present to us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you guys for having me today. I'm going to briefly present on UNICEF's Return to Happiness program. So let me give you some background history. When Return to Happiness was originally devised, it was way back in 2004, and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time to field tested for UNICEF after Hurricane Ivan in Grenada. So prior to Maria is what we call Hurricanes Irma and Maria. Before Maria, I had already been very familiar with the program. Divinely, the year before our epic storms, I had the opportunity to send one of my team members to St. Lucia to train as a trainer for Return to Happiness. And she, Ms. Maradine, came back and trained the persons on our crisis intervention team. So God was looking out for us. And so when the hurricanes hit, we immediately began to implement the program. So next slide, Michael, thanks. So Return to Happiness is a UNICEF-designed psychological first aid intervention for children. Originally, it was for children from 5 to 12 years old. But in the BVI, after the two storms, we recognized that the children before 5 and the children after 12 required some services as well. And so we augmented the program on the fly because we didn't have a choice. We had to make the adjustments. UNICEF saw the adjustments that we made to the program, and then they contracted us to what's the word I'm looking for? Operationalize what we did and standardize what we did so that they could expand the program to include from infants all the way to 18-year-olds. So it's a psychological first aid program for children now between the ages of 0 to 18 years old. Return to Happiness is play therapy tailored to assist children who have experienced trauma through either man-made or natural disasters. So it could be child abuse, storms, fires, earthquakes, or a pandemic. What we were able to do is after we standardized the program and turned it back over to UNICEF, we were able to train all our guidance counselors and our teachers in the public and private sector because they became the facilitators for the program. Next slide. So the goals of the program are for children to be happy. And very often during disasters of any type, children tend to fall to the wayside. You know, they're just there like a piece of furniture or ornament. Adults are so consumed with trying to stabilize and return things to normal that they're very often unable to attend to the psychological needs of the children who are around. And we know that children are negatively impacted, children and the elderly, more than any other demographic when we have sudden traumatic events. So we try to create an atmosphere for children to return to the business of being children, to focus on the after and how things can get better, to restore their self-confidence, and to restore their confidence in their environment. And so that is the basic of the program. Next slide. So we already talked about some of the events that could be traumatic. Right now here in the Virgin Islands, a lot of our schools were destroyed by the storm. Some students have been able to return back to school, but the El Moscow High School has not repaired its entire campus. The kids were on half-day shifts, so some go in the morning, some go in the evening. And then COVID happened. And so these children who only had access to half a day of school didn't have access anymore. They were online. Well, now they're back out and they're still at half day. And I'm wondering longitudinally what the effects will be for these students who went into high school right before the storm but didn't have a traditional experience. We're not collecting any data on that, but it would be interesting to see. Next slide. So the 5 core objectives for the program is to decrease the number and intensity of symptoms of post-traumatic stress, and our facilitators have data collection forms where they survey the children, they survey the parents, and they're able to collect before and after data. To decrease the participants' measured sense of anxiety, to increase the participants' measured sense of security, hope for the future. That is very important. Hope is the kryptonite of sadness and depression. So if we could build hope for the young people, we increase their resiliency and their ability to rebound from the disaster. To increase the participants' measured sense of happiness and satisfaction, and to improve the participants' measured sense of support from family and community. That was very challenging for us. The Ministry of Education had partnered with UNICEF on this program, but we were struggling to get them to include the program in the timetable because students had missed so many days of school because of the storm. There were curriculums that needed to be caught up on, and the teachers took the position that this was just one more thing that they had to do. Not all teachers had that demeanor. Some were very excited to utilize the program because they saw the improvement in their students when they participated versus when they did not participate. All right, next slide. So who benefits? Children, teachers, parents, community volunteers, anybody that's involved with helping a child after a sudden traumatic event. Children don't have the words to express themselves, but we know that they experience the wide range of emotions that we all do. Giving them the tools in which that they can express and articulate and work through their feelings is a benefit for everyone. In Grenada, when I was piloting the program, we were in a local school in one of the parishes, and the children were so grateful. I mean, so grateful to have us there. And in my mind, all I was doing was playing with them, but they were just so happy that another adult was interested in how they were feeling and what they were experiencing. Next slide. I'm not going to go through all the slides, but so the methods vary from 0 to 18. And so you utilize which method is age appropriate. So for the little small babies, we devised with them playing with soft toys, singing lullabies and songs with them, giving them loving touches, because at 0 to 4, you may not be able to understand all the words, but you can certainly understand the intent. I don't know how successful it was after we handed over the program to the Ministry of Education. They didn't bring data back to us, but I feel comfortable in knowing that all the educators here in the Virgin Islands had an opportunity to learn the program. And if anything should happen, again, God forbid, we have trained facilitators at each and every level of child development to intervene with these children. Next slide. Right. So the program runs for 11 days over a 3-week period. Participants are exposed to a total of 20 hours of play therapy for 10 days, with each session being 2 hours long. And it doesn't matter how old they are, it's the same. Students will be involved in activities such as drawing, dramatic playing, modeling, cultural activities, theater, etiquette groups. I know at one private school, they love the song Despacito. And one of the facilitators sent in this video where there was this huge dance party and all the kids were singing along to Despacito and dancing and just having a good time. And they were super happy. And this was like maybe 3 weeks after the storm. So it was nice to see them actually engage and having a good time. By engaging children in these activities, they have the opportunity to display their skills, relieve tension, express their feelings and ideas, and be happy. Next slide.
2 minutes to go, Dr. Rubin. Thank you.
I'm gonna wrap up. So this program is based usually on volunteers. So when I was in Grenada, we were training teachers, peer counselors, anybody who was interested in intervening with the kids. In the case of BVI, not only is the crisis team, which is a volunteer corps, trained, but now all the educators and guidance counselors. It is extremely important that the volunteers understand that all activities must follow the healing process of before, during, and after the trauma disaster. And volunteers must also be observant, attentive, and aware so that children who are experiencing considerable difficulty coping with situations can be identified for follow-up. So that's the other great benefit of the Return to Happiness program, because children who are having extreme PTSD, may have complicated grief or any other situations, this program would highlight these students, and there is a referral process for getting these children additional help. I love Return to Happiness. I love being a facilitator of Return to Happiness. I'm a big child. I like to play. One of the things that we do when we're training volunteers and facilitators is we have them do all the activities that they're going to do with the kids. And it's really a lot of fun. It's a stress relief. I think we should have Return to Happiness for big people too. So I'm not going to go on any further. I want to share this presentation with everybody. So if Michael can share it, that would be awesome. And if there are any questions, Ian, can I use my last minute to answer them? Or have I already used it?
I think we need to move on if that's okay, but we are going to have the Q&A and there is the chat function. So thank you very much, Dr. Rubin. That was really interesting to hear more about that important program for children and young people, particularly after disasters and traumatic events. So thank you very much for that. If I can encourage participants, please do use the chat function if you're able to not only pose questions, but comments as well. And we will also try and use that to generate questions for the Q&A to our panelists at the end. But we will now move on to the third presentation. And these are some colleagues from the Cayman Islands. So it's my privilege to introduce Dr. Erica Lamb and Monique Thompson as well. So Dr. Erica Lamb is a doctorate clinical psychologist, specialist in trauma, attachment and complex mental health difficulties. She works with looked after children's services and developed trauma-informed care through consultation and training. In addition to her clinical work, Dr. Lamb is on the board of Alex Panton Foundation and the TheraPlay Institute, involved in many community and charity initiatives and has led many outreach projects. One of her current focus areas involves working with community leaders to improve access to children and their mental health service. And to Monique Thompson as well. Monique is a proud Caymanian from the district of Georgetown. She joined the Youth Ambassadors program to fuel her passion for helping the youth and to voice her opinions on mental health. Along with other ambassador students, Monique met with the governor to discuss the impacts of the pandemic and the changes that they would like to see happen in the near future. Some issues they spoke about was the creating of a 24-hour mental health hotline and the decriminalisation of suicide. Monique has faced her own challenges with mental health and wishes to see her island adopt a proactive way of addressing these issues. So it's our pleasure to welcome you both to present now to the webinar. Over to you. Is it Dr. Erica first?
Thank you, Ian. I do apologize that Monique is not able to join us. I've just received a message. She's fine, but she just not able to.
Oh, that is a shame. Okay,
it's a shame.
Thanks for letting us
However,
know.
you will see her on our video, so hopefully that would be helpful. So I'm going to go right ahead and talk about the presentation. First of all, thank you so much for this platform. So Alex Panton Foundation is a local charity, specifically addressing children and adolescents' mental health in the area of depression and anxiety. It's founded by the Panton family. Alex has succumbed to depression at the age of 16, and this foundation sets up in his memory in order to address mental health difficulties. And as Ian has already pointed out, we have achieved decriminalization of suicide already. And today I have the privilege to talk about how the organization kind of work and the program that we are providing through the Clinical Education Committee. So this is basically how our foundation kind of work. We have the chairman and the board member, we have the clinical consultant, and that's where I sit. I'm the clinical consultant, and we have an administrative assistant, and then we have like the several kind of committee. And my committee fall under the Clinical Education Committee. We have an external, we have a couple of external consultants who provide us with advices in the kind of the specialist area, and you will meet some of those in my slide. And out of that, we have 5 subcommittee, basically different pathway addressing different areas of mental health. So basically, this is the working model of our committee, the clinical committee. We gather research, we gather evidence through research and audit in order to support us in developing program, because we are relatively young as an organization. We're only about 3 years old in terms of how long we have been active. So when we set up the foundation, we say that we need to collect local data that is meaningful to us, that is culturally specific to our population of young people. So we partner with other organizations in order to achieve that. So basically the program and the pathway or the working model that we have developed is based on the evidence that we have gathered, which I will go into in a little bit. So the core of the foundation is participations and having volunteer. So all of our members in the Alex Panton Foundation are volunteer, including myself. We only have 1 paid position, which is the admin administrator. The rest of the member are all volunteer. So we partner with, my page ran out of space, otherwise I would be able to actually put in more logo to represent all the current partnership that we have, including international partnership and local partnership, as well as administration and Department of Education and Department of Children and Family has been our biggest kind of partnership in order to help us to roll out this program. So the first kind of pathway that I'm going to talk about is the research and evidence-based practice. So we collect local mental health data every 2 years in partnership with the National Drugs Council. And we interpret the data, we analyze it in order to come up with the appropriate clinical recommendation to the community, and we disseminate it to our stakeholder in conjunction with National Drugs Council. We also ensure that the data are post in a way that is meaningful, by sharing in social media, by developing kind of infographics and sharing presentations, putting in our symposium. So all of those information sharing, which is what Dr. Yates was kind of saying, we're working on it. And this is the second time we're sharing all of those mental health data. And what we found helpful is making those comparison of our local data versus international mental health data. And if you give me another hour, I will go into it. But for now, I'm going to stop myself. In terms of the audits data, is something that we're very proud to say that every initiative that we roll out, we collect data and we analyze it. And actually, we have an independent external statistician who help us with that. So therefore, the data is quite independently analyzed. I will go into some of those examples when I go into the other subcommittee. One of our latest project is the LGBTQ focus group. So we have just commissioned a local clinician who has an expertise in LGBTQ population. And we have just collected and analyzed the first round of the focus group data. The data will be released hopefully next month or so. So stay put, have a look on our website if you're interested in data in this population. So the next pathway that I want to talk about is called the Emotional Literacy Pathway Program. They short for Sippy and Apple. So Sippy and Apple basically is two group program. Basically is a school-based social emotional learning program developed by the Partnership for Children in the UK, but it's actually an international program specialized in emotional literacy. So we brought that on Ireland 2 years ago, and we're very, very proud to say that is now nationally rolled out in all our government primary school and majority, well, some of our private primary school as well as after school program because of our partnership with the YMCA. And in the video in a little bit, you will see all the kind of success and some of the material as well. So let me go back to the program itself. So each of those chapters in those emotional literacy program address coping skill, social skill, emotional literacy, improve the class climate, and reducing bullying. So basically, this program is run in the school. We train the teacher in delivering this year-long program because it's cheaper to build emotionally resilient children than to repair adults with mental health difficulties. With that ethos, we want to enhance and build resilience from a very, very young age. And local data that we have collected 2 rounds of data already. The local data proven significantly that emotional literacy programs show significant changes in social communication skill, self-awareness, as well as coping skill. Again, if you give me another year, I can go into all the statistics and all the significance. But for now, that we maybe good time to watch some of the emotional literacy video, and I would like to just show the first couple of minutes. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Michael, and you can share the video for our audience, perhaps. While Michael is getting the video up, I just talk a little bit more about the emotional literacy program. We started with just kind of pilot school, and collected data. And because of the pandemic and the focus of the school recovery post-pandemic, we were able to partner with the Ministry of Education and support by the Department of Education to have a national rollout in all of the government school, and by addressing some of the post kind of pandemic stress as well as emotional responses. So it comes in quite a timely kind of collaboration recently. So we're going to have a watch of the first couple of minutes of this emotional literacy program video. So basically, this is Melanie, one of our master trainer, who is delivering the emotional literacy program in the classroom setting. It's one of the school called the Montessori school, and some of the material you can see that is quite kind of visual. So this is one of the primary school. I believe this is in Prospect Primary School. As you can see, the material are very, very visual, and each of the young people get given a booklet, their own booklet, and the material is narrative based, as in there is story, hence the name Sippy. Sippy basically is a insect, and the story is around him. And apples basically is a fluffy hamster that's or the narrative is about him as well. So we're going to kind of perhaps pause at the video. Basically, this show you some of the emotional literacy program and some of the training. These are some of the training session, how our master trainer disseminate the training in each of the region. So as the video has captured, we have over kind of 300 teacher, CP and Apple teacher trained up already in the island. Basically, we train up master trainer and we go ahead and train other teacher. So it's quite a domino effect that we managed to achieve. So I'm going to switch back and go back to my PowerPoint, if that's okay, Michael. And for those of you who want to watch the rest of the 2 minutes, please go onto our website, alexpantonfoundation.ky, and you can enjoy the rest of the video if you want to. So this is that's kind of the emotional literacy program that you kind of seen, and is, like I said, is in partnership with Partnership for Children and supported by.
A couple more minutes, Dr. Lamb, please.
Thank you. And so this is kind of the working model, if you, those of you who are kind of interested in knowing the ins and outs. Now, this is the outreach program. So the outreach program basically consists of community workshop. We provide workshops, lunch and learns in those kind of the topics that listed in here in the community. And we usually deliver them in school or corporate sectors. We get invited to churches and all of those like target audience. So we run them very kind of regularly, and we have a group of volunteers who are familiar with our packages to go out and do things like that. We have annual symposium with different theme. We have monthly newsletter, media posts providing resources. And we also have the peer support group that is face-to-face in our local university, provided by our volunteer, where young people can drop by and talk about their kind of mental health difficulties or their stories or their experiences. We also have an online support group run by Dr. Smith, who is a clinical psychologist for school-age children who specifically struggle with anxiety or stress. And that is also free access to all our young people as well. Now we're going to talk about this, which is our kind of latest kind of project, is the Children Adolescents Mental Health Hub, where we are in collaboration with the Ministry of Health. Basically, the function is like a children A&E for mental health in management of risk assessment, suicidal ideation, or crisis management, and provide mental health support. We're also developing an online platform, which is basically providing psychoeducation material. There will be a text line and a helpline as well embedded in the platform. So that's good. Those are kind of our latest projects. Now, this is a youth ambassador program where Monique was going to kind of talk a little bit more about it. But without her, we're going to watch the first video of what the youth ambassador program really is about. Michael, whenever you're ready. Oops, hang on. I'm going to end the slides. So that is one of the art competition in helping young people to process some of their feelings post-pandemic. So those are the mission that our youth ambassador has established. And this is one of the first campaign about don't be silent about your difficulties. And they go into school to talk to young people. They also have the panel in the symposium and talking about the experience. And basically, the youth ambassador program is led by young people themselves. And they come up with campaign and project that they focus on every year. So that's the end of the first kind of video. And we do have a second video, which is only literally 1 minute, if we have time to share that.
Yeah, we have time. Maybe we'll make that the last one. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So there should be a sound in this one as well, which is really important to hear what the youth ambassador are kind of saying.
The power of vulnerability. Remember, we're all different, so there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for every problem. Being vulnerable with your students gives them the bravery to trust you. It's difficult to be vulnerable in the face of perceived judgment.
Notice your students' vulnerability. Misbehaving could be a cry for help.
So those are the testimony of our young people. Basically, it's a short video for them to talk about, to encourage other young people to join the youth ambassador to spread their message. And that comes to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your time.
Lovely. Thank you, Dr. Lamb. Really appreciate your time and presenting the work of the Alex Penton Foundation, and especially with the program for youth ambassadors. Really exciting to see that and getting young people involved. It's fantastic. Okay, so that concludes the presentation section of the webinar today. We're now going to open up for questions or comments, or if other colleagues would like to share some of their work from their territories. If you could find the hand raising icon, which usually is a little face with a hand next to it, and if you click that button, it should give you a raised hand. If there are any raised hands, then we'd like to come to you to ask your question or to raise your point on the audio. I might need some support to find any hands if there are any. Patrick, I think that, yeah, did you have your hand up, Patrick? If you want to unmute yourself and either ask your question or raise your point, over to you, thanks. I think you need to unmute yourself, Patrick, please.
Can you hear me now?
We can now, yeah. Please go ahead. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ian, and thanks to all of the presenters. Very, very interesting. And it's great to be part of the Gibraltar delegation listening in today. Just two things. First of all, I loved what Dr. Lamb put up in one of her strap lines, which was, it's cheaper to build emotional resilient children than to repair adults with mental health difficulties. And you know what? I think that is something we all should have in our strategic plans and documents, because we spend so much time fixing things rather than preventing things. So I love that statement. One of the things I'd like to ask panel members, I'm very much into integrating services, education, social care, health, because I think we all work in silos. We all believe we work together, but when it comes to sharing resources, that's money and people, we back off. I'd like to hear from the panel, how integrated have they got with their services? i.e., have they brought people together in one organization because they're small communities, or is it still very much silo working and people work within their own kind of structures?
Great question. Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, very helpful. If I can come to all three of the panelists and ask you just to maybe answer within 1 minute, just a short answer, please. It'd be just good to capture that. Dr. Yates, could I come to you first in Bermuda? Just some brief thoughts on that.
Patrick, I've had mixed experience. I've found that my relationship with the local pediatricians has become really good. and that we communicate a lot and it works really well. I think that is also a reflection of having some quite clear pathways when diagnosis is not in question. With education and social services, there are many more people involved. So that has been a little bit more difficult. But I think we are moving in the right direction. I mean, the problem that, it is a resource problem. You need to spend time on relationships to get them right and to get them fruitful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Yates. And if I could come to Dr. Rubin, have you got some comments on that question?
I think it's a very good question, Patrick. Unfortunately, in the BVI, we're still in silos because the mandates have not yet aligned. For example, when we're trying to launch Return to Happiness in the schools, an initiative that education agreed to, they became one of the biggest stumbling blocks. And I think unless we have some kind of universal mission and vision for what we're supposed to be doing, and we really do with the conventions of the rights of the child, but it doesn't always pan out that way. So sometimes we have turf wars. I've seen it gotten better over the 17 years that I've been here, but we still have a ways to go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rubin, really helpful. And Dr. Lamb, from your perspective?
Yeah, so in the Cayman Islands, we have quite unique kind of privileges as well as our own challenges, because the way that we kind of set up. We have HSA, which is a public kind of free. Well, it's still kind of based on insurance charges, and we majority of us are private provider. So following up on what Dr. Yates was saying about that kind of having clear pathway, having clear kind of role, and that kind of MDT kind of working. We're still working on that. The privileges being in a charity kind of hat as well is that, as you can see, the Alex Panton Foundation, very early on, we, all of us were saying we need to glue the community kind of together. So we have a very kind of clear mission. We have a very clear mission and kind of like we need kind of, the emotional literacy program as one of the preventative and who are our stakeholder. So, establishing those very clear goal, very clear kind of pathway and identifying our stakeholder, captivating them, and actually providing the resources. I mean, Alex Panton Foundation able to provide all of these services for free because of our sponsor. And our sponsor basically rely on data. They look at the data, they see the numbers, they are like, okay, this is real. We need to, invest in this. So what we found is when the resources is available, we have clear kind of mission, we have clear kind of pathway and lead to take us to that place. We find that the glue come together beautifully, as you can see, with some of our program. And when we actually listen to young people, when we let young people take the lead, and that's why I love the Youth Ambassador program. When the young people is taking a lead, they are actively doing that grassroots, going out there advocating for themselves with a bit of resource and guidance from clinician and adults, really make a massive difference because it's their generation that we're targeting, isn't it?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Lamb. Really appreciate that response, and thanks, Patrick, for the question. Okay, we're going to move slightly on. We had a hand up from Tracy Paul Nandi, but if I can just ask Tracy if it's okay to just pause that question, because we've actually got a couple of ministers on the call, and I'm aware that they probably need to leave to other meetings. And while they're on the call, we wanted to make the most of the opportunity here. So I wondered if we could come to the minister in the Cayman Islands, if you're on the call. So the Honourable Sabrina Turner, MP, who's the Minister for Health and Wellness in the Cayman Islands. Minister, can we come to you for some brief reflections, please?
Sure. Good morning, and it is a pleasure to be here this morning. And I must say I'm very impressed at the presentation, your panelist and Dr. Lamb. it's good. You know, you guys have your definite hands and fingers on the pulse. And as a government, I can assure you, a Minister of Health and Wellness, we are, and I'm committed as a government and the minister to looking at breaking those silos, as you've alluded to, and definitely working close in partnership with being more inclusive, making sure that their young people does have a stake, but more so, we are a developing jurisdiction when it comes to even the awareness of mental health, even looking more even at our young people and our children. That's going to take collaborative works with education, with medical insurance providers, and we are blessed as a small jurisdiction to have organizations such as the Alex Panton Foundation leading the charge. In our capacity, it is at the forefront in making whatever legislations and policies available and engaging in those so that we can definitely provide them with the resources that they need. Currently, for decades, all of persons needing medical care had to be sent overseas to get care. We're now completing our long-term mental health facility. We're hoping to complete that by the end of this year, which will allow us to no longer have to necessarily send our patients overseas, but more so to bolster up legislation where children are not left out and they're being more inclusive. So I must say that as a government and as Minister of Health and Wellness, preventative care is a top priority, and definitely mental health is one of our key things that we're championing. So definitely resources will be there, and I'm hoping that more webinars of this nature and looking at what's happening in other jurisdictions and hoping other governments, ministers can play their role as well.
Minister Turner, thank you very much for those reflections, and we warmly welcome your support for mental health and you championing it. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon and those reflections, much valued. Thank you. So if we can now go over to the Minister in Gibraltar. So this is the Honourable Samantha Sacramento MP, who's the Minister for Justice, Equality, Health and Care. Minister Sacramento, if you'd like to share your brief reflections, please, this afternoon.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. I hope everyone is safe and well, especially after this horrible, horrible year that we've had. Thank you very much for organising this event. This one, like the last one that you organised, is incredibly helpful because I think I probably said it last time, but as overseas territories, and even though we are geographically in the far reaches of the world, we have a lot in common, and I think that our greatest general common denominator is our size. And I think that the fact that we're all small and mostly small islands means that a lot of the mental health problems that we have will be problems that we have in common, and therefore our solutions should also be in common. And that's why I'm a great fan of this kind of shared knowledge and working together, because there's a lot of best practice that we can learn from each other. And certainly I've gleaned a lot of ideas from what I've heard this afternoon. I think sort of my favorite is probably the happiness program, which in the title itself is fantastic, and I think that it shouldn't be limited to children, because particularly after the very tough year we've had, I think that we probably need a happiness program for everyone, because I think that we all need to recalibrate and see what we need to do. But from my point of view, and sort of a reflection from Gibraltar, from my point of view, what I've done is I've attempted to completely recalibrate our mental health services. So in combination of setting up a team and a working group to look at Gibraltar at a policy level and public health level, and I have to thank Ian and his colleagues for work that they did with us at the outset and continue to do. And again, let's not underestimate the resources that we have available to us through Public Health England and all these other resources that we can tap into. And the majority of colleagues from my working group are here today, so everyone knows that they can expect a barrage of emails from me in the next hour as to action points and things, because I'm obviously very motivated after this afternoon. But what I've done now is, and you've heard from Patrick, is I've recruited someone externally to help us now implement our policy. So really, my timeline is that I started this project really last November. I would like to, by the end of this summer, completely be able to prepare to present locally a complete overhaul of our mental health strategy, mental health services, and all of it has to be multi-agency. And I think that's one of the things that's really come out today. We cannot work in silos, because mental health is something that affects all our services and all our public services. And we need to look at the individual, looking at the individual and look at all the services that that person will need to access means that we all have to work together for the benefit of that person. So to wrap up, really, I really look forward to working closer together with colleagues from all of the UK overseas territories, because I think that we have a lot in common and a lot to gain from sharing our knowledge. So thank you everyone for your very interesting presentations and contributions today.
Thank you, Minister Sacramento. Again, we really appreciate the time you've taken to join us today for this, and we appreciate the way that you champion and show leadership for mental health for your community, and so we applaud that and thank you for that. Now into the last section of our time together today on this webinar. We still have time for some open questions, or if other colleagues would like to share some of the work that they're doing and their experiences, then we would like to open the mic for those colleagues as well. Tracy Paul Nandy, you did have your hand up earlier. If you're on the call still, would you like to unmute and ask your question or make your point if you are there?
Right. Hi, this isn't Tracy, this is Jack here, sitting here with Tracy on St. Helena. Hi, we were just wondering about transition planning, and if any of our colleagues in other overseas territories had any initiatives that are working well, so that when we intervene with children, how do we bridge the gap and prevent any breakdowns through transition planning into adult service or adulthood?
Thank you. Yeah, really important question, Jack. We appreciate that, and great that you could join us from St. Helena. So colleagues on the panel, do you have examples or thoughts around the transition from supporting children into adult services and how that transition is undertaken? Should we go in the same order? Dr. Yates, do you have reflections there from Bermuda, please?
So Jack, to try and address your question, I think first of all, it's being aware of which patients are going to need transition, so trying to think about prognosis. And I think with some patients, it's going to be pretty clear they're going to need to go over to adult services. Others, their conditions, their presentation may be short-lived. So the recognition is the first thing. Beginning the discussion with the patient and the parents and or guardians early, I think is important. I tend to start that at around age 17. Some of my patients will transition at 18 and some will go at 19, depending on if they're in full-time education. And then maybe it's a little bit easier for me because I have 4 adult colleagues who run the adult service and we work in the same building. So I would then take the referral to the adult side, and the adult consultant would be identified, based on geographical location, and will offer the appointment. I will stay involved until the first appointment. If they don't attend the first appointment, I carry on. And I think that's really important. I mean, I can't carry on forever, obviously, but I will carry on seeing them, because the next appointment may be, 3 months later, and we'll try and, hand over as smoothly as possible. Just recently, we've started something slightly different. Child and adolescent mental health used to be more ring-fenced. We used to have a separate director. We've now become part of mental health, the whole of mental health. So we feel like we've been swallowed up by the adult side. Now, that also has some benefits, because we have agreed that clinicians on both sides, adult and child and adolescent, can work down and upstream, if I can put it that way. So sometimes I'm asked about a young adult who there may be a question of autistic spectrum disorder. And so I would then go and see a 22-year-old or 23-year-old. And sometimes we'd have adult workers coming and joining us with 16 or 17-year-olds. That's the idea. So we're trying to take away that clear boundary. I guess ideally a transitional service from 18 to 25 would really be something to be looked at. But I guess the patient shouldn't feel the bumps. And that's difficult. But those are my thoughts.
Lovely. Thank you, Dr. Yates. Yeah, very, very insightful and helpful. Dr. Rubin, could you describe how things maybe are done there with your services?
So it's very interesting. We don't have a clear delineation between children and adults. So we have one service that caters to children and adults. So there's really no gap as they age through the program, because it's the same service. So if we have a child with ADHD who, as an adult, continues to struggle with ADHD and maybe develops depression, it's the same team. So it's the same psychiatrist. What might happen is maybe our school psychologist may not be as involved in the case as the person gets older, but we still have a multidisciplinary team. So we don't have that issue with transition, because there's no delineation in the services.
Really helpful, yeah. So that's in a sense an advantage, isn't it, of having that structure of services, that actually the care can continue without being interrupted, which avoids that challenge and problem. Great, thank you, Dr. Rubin. So in terms of Cayman, Dr. Lamb, what are your thoughts on this? And so just before you answer, I just wanted to flag up, we probably have time for one more question after this. So please, if colleagues want to put their hand up to raise a question, then please do. Sorry, Dr. Lamb, over to you.
Fine, thank you. Our experience is quite similar to Dr. Rubin in Virgin Islands. In HSA in the Cayman Islands, there's one team with several different psychiatrists, and they do have child psychologists there. So when the child psychologists do need to transition, the young person, it is under one roof, it's under kind of one surface. So there isn't that much of a kind of barrier when it's come to transition. But Ian, you raised a very, very important point, or is it Dr. Yates who raised an important point? The client shouldn't feel the bump, right? Just because the way that the services is structured that way, does the client or the family or the multidisciplinary team, the wider services feel the same way? It is yet to kind of, explore, and I'm sure there's always room kind of for improvement. Now, the interesting thing about the private sector now in the Cayman Islands is that a lot of the family and service user do access mental health services through private provider, and the private services do have their own kind of specialism, in terms of age group or presentations, and it is down to the family and the young people to kind of almost look out for the best kind of service provider. And over the years that I've been here, I noticed that private clinicians work very, very hard to communicate with each other if there is a client that needs transitioning. But we certainly don't have like an overall kind of structure for it either. So yeah, it's definitely something that definitely need exploring, really.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lamb. Yeah, very, very helpful comments. So I'm not sure if I can see any other hands. I wondered if I could take a sort of chair's privilege and ask a question of my own just before we end to the three panelists. And the question is sort of if you could make one change, what would you make? If you could into the future, if you could wave a magic wand or change one thing maybe for to improve children and young people's mental health where you are. What change would you make, or what would you like to see that you feel would make a big difference? If that's okay. Appreciate it puts you on the spot. Dr. Yates, have you got any thoughts in terms of something you'd really love to see change there if you could wave this proverbial magic wand?
I think it has to be along the lines of high profile people in the community or the society talking about what they've struggled with.
Great. Yeah, really important, isn't it, for people with lived experience of mental health problems to be open and to talk about it, to address some of the, I guess, some of that sort of stigma and those feelings that people have. Thank you. That's very helpful. Dr. Rubin, what are your thoughts? If you could wave this proverbial magic wand, what would you like to see change for children and young people's mental health?
I would like to see an abundance of funding towards programs that enrich children mentally, physically, and academically. It's always the last thing that we think about here, but it has to be the first thing. Not to be corny, but Whitney Houston did say the children are our future.
Yeah.
So this idea that they're more resilient, they're stronger, they're more adaptable than they really are, I think we need to do away with that and dedicate some serious resources to them.
Great, thank you. Yeah, resources, ever so important, isn't it? Unfortunately, there's a bottom line to these things. So budget and resources and human resources is so important. Thank you very much. Dr. Lamb, what are your thoughts? If you could wave this magic wand, what would you love to see changed for children and young people's mental health?
I think following the kind of theme about resources, and I might be a little bit controversial here, but this is purely my personal opinion. We really need to address the premium of like health insurance, because we are in the Cayman Islands. We rely on private health insurance and provider and packages, and that's unfortunately sometimes create quite a lot of barrier in access, because some packages do not include outpatient mental health access, and that really stop people accessing early enough and wait until kind of crisis to then access, or kind of, then access resources in order to allow them to access mental health, which kind of contradict a lot of what we're saying today, isn't it? Early accessibility, preventative, building resilience. So if we don't kind of sort out the practical stuff of things, it's going to be very hard for our next generation, really. And in the Cayman Islands, to my personal opinion, we really need to reform the way that insurance provider write their packages for outpatient mental health.
Great, thank you, Dr. Lamb. Yeah, very important, those sort of financial mechanisms that operate in the health sector and how they can create barriers in themselves inadvertently. So thank you, yeah, very important. Lovely. Well, I guess some of the challenge is there for all of us, isn't it, on the call today, that actually in terms of improving children and young people's mental health, then we would want to argue that we all have a role to play in that. And so it's for us to consider what role we can all play in furthering and improving the mental health of our children and young people. As Dr. Rubin said, they are our future, and so they're important to invest in. But thank you for the panel. We appreciate your time this morning. We appreciate your expertise and your sharing all of that you've done there in your work. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. Dr. Yates, Dr. Rubin, Dr. Lamb, thank you very much for your time. So just before we close, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Kedil, who's also part of the UKOTA Association, to assist us in closing the session. Over to you, Kedil.
Thank you, Ian. Just before I leave, Adam, are you still with us?
I am still here, Kedil, yes.
Have you got, I know you've got to rush off for a meeting with the Minister. Have you got time just to give a few reflections?
Yeah, I have, definitely so. But just, yeah, really excellent session. And I just wanted to say that I'm really enthusiastic about this myself, not only in a professional capacity, because I've got responsibility for the UK's overseas territories, but I'm also a parent and a school governor in a school where we do a lot of work on this. So a really big thank you to the speakers for their excellent presentations. This is a really good opportunity to share knowledge and experience. Most importantly, I think, encourage everyone to have that open dialogue about mental health in all of our communities. I think we can't do that enough. And we all know the overseas territories are hugely varied. Some of them are small communities, but in many cases, remote islands that have a lot of challenges in providing mental health services. And we've seen today there's a lot of progress has been made, and I'm really excited about the excellent innovative approaches, particularly bringing in NGOs and other organisations. But I think we can never be complacent. I think particularly in a world where there is increasing pressure on children, be it exams, peer pressure, the dread of social media, or the pandemic or hurricanes, there will always be a need to ensure that mental health of children is not taken for granted. So the FCDO is really pleased to continue its support for the Public Health England programmes in the territories, in particular that on mental health. But I'm really keen that the UK government can support the territories by learning from what we've done well in the UK, definitely what we've done not so well, and access the experts and practitioners in the UK. So as a next step, maybe through UKOTA in the territories, we need to think about how we put this into an action plan. And in the words of 19th century social reformist and abolitionist Frederick Douglass, it's easy to build strong children than repair broken men. So the work that you're all doing now to build resilience in your children, ensure that they grow up in environments where they can flourish and reach their potential, is incredibly important to build those strong, resilient societies. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Adam, and of course, as always, for your support. So to just close off the session, I would like to say thank you as the chair of the working group to all of the speakers, to you, Ian, for facilitating this so well today, but also a special thank you to Michael Betts, the deputy representative from the Falkland Islands, who has done a huge amount of work behind the scene and has managed all of the IT today. We have asked if participants are happy to share the email addresses. I think most have agreed. And so we're hoping that this will help territories start to be able to talk to one another more on this very important subject. UKOTA has already agreed that the next webinar will take place and it will focus on mental health in the workplace. We haven't set a date. It will be in a few months' time. So until then, thank you to all of you, the participants. We couldn't have this without you. And let's continue to work together for the good of the people in our territories. Thank you.
Thanks, Kedil. Thank you.
Thank you, Kedil. Thank you, everyone.